to Utility Sports. Today's video, we are going to be going over the top 100 players in the NBA according to Sheldon. This is a list that he composed over the last couple of days. If you are new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. Also, leave a like on this video if you do enjoy the content. Let's jump right into it here, and we look at the bottom of this list.
Yeah, so here I've got my 100 to 96. Like Austin had said, this is a list I've been working on for quite some time, really trying to compose the best top 100 players. And again, like the preface of this video, it is for this season. So you're going to have some rookies on here who are going to elevate over the course of time. This is not a long-term ranking. This is a ranking for the single season here based on who I think are the most talented players, the most impactful players throughout the league. Remember now, top 100 guys, that's basically top 3 options for each team. So if there's someone on here that you like that's not included, don't get your feelings hurt. There's a lot of good players that just don't make the list because out of the 450 guys on active rosters, I could only include 100. So here, 100 through 96, I got Scotty Barnes, Derrick Rose, DeAndre Hunter, Gary Trent Jr., Jaren Jackson, Austin. Mostly for this video, I want you to be kind of, leading. Which way do you want to talk about this? Is there any players that stand out to you in this list here?
I think this is a player that maybe not a lot of people would think is a top 100 player, because DeAndre Hunter had some struggles early on in his career. He's kind of turned things around, reinvented himself. What's the big difference that you've seen from his rookie season to now?
A lot more consistent on the offensive end, which is really where my question was for him coming out of Virginia. I had concerns about what his three-point shot really looked like, and he's kind of starting to prove me wrong a little bit on where my draft analysis was on him a few years ago. I have him 98th here because he's a nice two-way player. And when he's healthy, he's a real contributing factor for that Atlanta Hawks team. They have a lot of nice players on that roster. They've done a really good job building out that team. And I think DeAndre Hunter is one of those players who this year, if he stays healthy, definitely would be considered a top 100 player by many in the NBA.
Now we're going to be moving on to the next part of the list. We have 95 to 91. A couple of key names here, some younger players. Tyrese Halliburton's the one that kind of stands out after a very, very nice rookie season. What did you like from Halliburton?
Halliburton's just a player you can plug and play in a lot of different ways. He's a talented enough playmaker where you can play him at the one by himself, but he's also talented enough as a shooter and scoring option that he can play off the ball as well next to De'Aaron Fox. De'Aaron Fox had a really nice improvement season this past year, and I think Tyrese Halliburton playing in the backcourt next to him was a key reason why. He gave the Kings a lot more depth in that backcourt. I really am excited about what they have moving forward as well, just for the fact that they added Davion Mitchell. They still have Buddy Hield there. The Kings have a very nice backcourt. Tyrese Halliburton, probably the second best player on their roster at this current point in my estimation. I really like what he provides as a deep range shooting option. He can shoot the ball with ease from 25 to 27 feet. He can space out the defense and very, very good in transition as well as a facilitator. I like what he brings at that guard position. He can play on ball, off ball, and gives you a lot of versatility with really good length and size as well for the position.
Another player that kind of stands out in this list is Collin Sexton, another polarizing player. And there's been a lot of rumors about him potentially being on the move. He's been involved with many, many trade talks. Are there any truth to those rumors? And what does he bring to this Cavs team moving forward this season?
I do think there's a lot of truth to those rumors. The day we're recording this is the day that Michael Porter Jr. got his massive extension. And Collin Sexton is in line for an extension as well at this point. He is coming up to the point where the Cavaliers have a choice to make on him. And unfortunately for him, I don't think the Cavaliers are going to commit long-term. They just spent a ton of money on Jarrett Allen, looked at Evan Mobley as their franchise cornerstone now at this point. And Collin Sexton, despite having really good numbers, I believe averaged about 25 points a game this past year on very good efficiency, he just doesn't really fit the role in terms of being your starting lead guard and best player on a team when you're trying to rebuild, especially when you look at how much Cleveland has or has not won at this point. I think Collin Sexton's really best suited to come off the bench as a six-man scoring option. I think he would instantly be the best six-man in the NBA if he was in that role, or at least one of the best. Of course, there's a guy like Jordan Clarkson as well, who's really, really talented that I don't want to discredit here. But I think Collin Sexton would instantly become really, really successful in that role. And Cleveland just doesn't really have him fitting the right need at this point, in my estimation.
And now we're going to transition into the 90 to 86 category. Patrick Williams was a guy that was impressive this past season. A little bit of work to do on the offensive end, but defensively he really stands out. A couple of other notable names. Now we're starting to get to former stars in Kemba Walker and John Wall, who obviously have been declining the last couple of seasons. Let's kind of focus in on Kemba Walker. because Kemba Walker went from the Hornets team, he was a true leader of that squad, to going to Boston, where it was a little clunky. Definitely, there was not enough of the ball to go around on that team. What was the issue there, and how will that be different now with the New York Knicks?
Kemba Walker just wasn't the right fit for that roster. They needed a more defensive-minded guard, someone who didn't necessarily need to have the ball in his hand to find a ton of success and wasn't a negative on defense. That's what Kemba Walker is at this point of his career. You know, when he made that All-NBA third team back with Charlotte, you know, that was just a different stage of his career. He was the lead player on that team for Charlotte. He was the go-to guy. In Boston, he wasn't that player anymore with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, how they ascended into star players there. And Kemba Walker felt like the odd man out offensively. Still put up 19 points and 5 assists a game last year. Was productive. Still should be considered a top 100 player in the NBA, especially when he's healthy. He is still a bucket machine. He can fill it up, and that's what the Knicks needed. I think he's going to be really key for their offense this year. And getting him on the mid-level exception, I think, was a really phenomenal value for that team, just because the buyout situation there allowed him to take less money than he's really worth. Honestly, he's a player who's worth about 18 to 22 million on the open market, and he's playing for 9 million this year with the New York Knicks. So I think the Knicks got a really good player that fits what they needed to add into that half court. We saw it against Atlanta. They struggled mightily to score. Julius Randle, basically all eyes were on him. He didn't produce at that level anymore, and Kemba Walker is going to be a guy who can really take a lot of that pressure off that Knicks backcourt.
He's definitely going to help with creation and getting those tough buckets when it comes down to clutch time at the end of the game. And now moving on to 85 all the way to 81. A couple of interesting names, guys, that you might not anticipate being at this point on the list. Robert Williams, Jay Crowder being two guys that might stand out as people might have them lower. Tell us why you have these guys so high.
Right, so in this list, it's kind of confusing here because Kevin Porter Jr. and Karis LeVert are looked at as two elite scoring options who can be leaders for a team. And Jay Crowder and Robert Williams are not those players, but Robert Williams and Jay Crowder are phenomenal, perfect role fit players. Without Jay Crowder, the Phoenix Suns don't get to the NBA Finals this past year. And I believe the same is true for the Miami Heat when they got Jay Crowder from the Memphis Grizzlies mid-season in the trade when they ultimately in the bubble went to the finals. Jay Crowder plays such a perfect role as a 3-and-D wing. You can play him on fives occasionally. He brings a lot of physicality, a lot of toughness. We saw him in the playoffs get into LeBron James' head. I try not to buy too much into that, but at the end of the day, Jay Crowder is a very valuable role player, and a lot of teams are always going to have a lot of interest in him. He's going to play into a perfect role, and I think Robert Williams as well is a player similar to that. He's going to screen and roll. He's going to run in transition, and he's going to protect the rim. Those are all key things at that center position. Robert Williams, if he can stay healthy, which I think is, a real key factor for a lot of these guys from about 80 to 100 so far. Some of these players could be higher if they just have been healthy up to this point. Robert Williams has been very productive when he's on the floor. He's an absolute block machine. I like what he does without the ball in his hands on offense and, of course, on defense as well. He's really progressed as a player, and I think this year is maybe the year that Ime Udoka there in Boston really harnesses what he can be for that Celtics unit.
And that's really key for this list. How well can they play to their roles? Like if they are elite role players, they are definitely going to find themselves on this list for sure. Maybe as a whole holistic basketball player, they might not be the best, but they really fit roles, and that has a lot of value in this league. Moving on to 80 to 76, we have Mike Conley, Jalen Suggs, a rookie, and a couple of other veterans on this list. Malik Beasley took a tremendous leap in his game, especially this last season. He's been fighting some legal issues, but let's talk about Jalen Suggs. How does he find his way onto the list without playing a game?
Jalen Suggs is such a good two-way player already at this point of his career. He's going to bring the intensity on defense. I'm not a believer in the whole he's winning. He's a winning type player thing because Orlando's going to lose a lot of games this year. Let's just get that out of the way. Orlando's not going to even sniff the playoffs this season, but that's not an issue with Jalen Suggs. He is going to bring the intensity. He can get to the rim whenever he wants. He's got an extremely fast and quick first step. He's able to beat guys off the dribble. He's a phenomenal playmaker, both in the open court and in the half court. He's able to play the combo guard position where you could either play him at the point guard or the two guard spot. Really, the only weakness in his game right now is shooting, which is really his big swing skill. If he can develop in that area, this guy instantly shoots up into a top 50 player in the NBA and even higher possibly in the future as he continues to progress his other skills as well. Jalen Suggs is a very well-rounded player outside of the shooting. At this point, for a guy like Mike Conley, some people might be questioning how is Jalen Suggs above Mike Conley, who was just an all-star. go ahead, look at Mike Conley's numbers. He averaged 15 points a game last year. And outside of that, when you're actually watching this Jazz team, they're just quite frankly better when Donovan Mitchell has the ball in his hands and is basically playing that point guard position. For me, Mike Conley, I think just the whole long-term hype of, oh, he's the best player to never make an all-star game type of feel kind of propelled him into an all-star game last year that he didn't really deserve. I have a hard time believing that anyone really thinks Mike Conley's better than Brandon Ingram. And that was the case last year based off of all-star appearances. That's just not really the reality of the NBA at this point. Mike Conley's been a really good player throughout his career. But, going into a little bit later in his career, having him 80th on this list is not a bad thing in my opinion.
75 to 71 is the next slide. We have Terry Rozier, a standout name in Charlotte. TJ Warren, another guy that definitely caught fire during that bubble, if you remember. He was a big factor for the Pacers. Joe Harris, an elite role player. Is there any guy that stands out here that you would like to talk about?
TJ Warren's really a key guy to me that I want to talk about because very quickly people forgot what he was doing in the bubble. Now, of course, there was no travel. A little bit of a different situation, so maybe that's partially what we're going to attribute that to. But at the same time, last year, he really struggled to stay on the floor, had a lot of injuries, and didn't really get to piggyback that success he found in the bubble. And I think that's a key reason why the Pacers team just was, a real trend downward last year from where they were the year before. Of course, Nate Bjorkgren played into that too. Their coaching situation was a mess. I think Rick Carlisle is going to help this team out tremendously. They've got a lot of nice players. Part of the issue, too, is those nice players, that really nice collection of guys that they have, is going to eat away at each other's numbers a little bit. Karis LeVert, TJ Warren, Malcolm Brogdon, Miles Turner, Domantas Sabonis, that's a lot of mouths to feed on one team. And they're going to play a lot of time on the floor together. All five of those guys are probably going to be starting level players for them. So it's hard to see any of these guys really average 25 to 28 points a night. But I think that they're all going to be around that 17 to 22 mark. Which is really impressive basketball, and I think is going to go a long way in the Indiana Pacers' success this season.
Another player that's notable, D'Angelo Russell, all the way down at 71. Some people would consider him a for sure top 50 player. What's the rationale on him being 71?
D'Angelo Russell's always been a guy who's been a little bit more elevated by the fans when it comes to where he should actually rank in the NBA. He's a very good player, and he can serve a really nice role for a team as a scoring guard, a lead scoring guard. But let's not look past some of his defensive deficiencies. Let's not look past his need to have the ball in his hand. He doesn't function extremely well without the ball in his hands. I know a lot of Wolves fans are going to say, well, he looked pretty good when Rubio had the ball last year. That's a very small sample size. Let's look back to when he was in Golden State for a similar amount of length and time. And the Golden State Warriors were on pace to win 15 games that year with D'Angelo Russell and Draymond Green in that offense. He's a good player, and 71st is not a bad spot for him, especially when you consider that makes you an elite third option on a team. If you're a top 15 player in terms of being a third option, that's a really nice player still in the NBA. That's someone who's going to get valued around the league by a lot of teams. And I think that's exactly where we find D'Angelo Russell currently.
We're going to move on here to the next one. A couple of interesting names that fall here: Tobias Harris, Marcus Smart, Jalen Green, another rookie that you could talk all day about. Let's talk a little bit about Nurkic. What does he do so well that puts him this high? Obviously, there's a lot to like about his game, but for people that don't really know, don't really watch the Blazers that often, what does he bring to the table?
Yeah, I think the Blazers really don't get a lot of publicity around the league, honestly, and around the United States when it comes to actual basketball. Nurkic is a very underrated playmaker at the center position. He's very capable at the top of the key, functioning as a playmaker, facilitator for that Portland Trailblazers offense. Now, I'm interested to see how Chauncey Billups uses him this year, because it might be a little bit different than how Terry Stotts has utilized him in the past. One of the knocks on Nurkic is he's not necessarily the best defender out in space, and he doesn't provide elite level rim protection either. So he's not a super big plus defensively, but offensively, he just performs at a high level. He's going to rebound the basketball for you. And he's someone that I would rely on really, really heavily as a center for me. I look at him as a top 10 center in the NBA for sure, and someone that can really provide stability to a front court, even if you don't have a lot of scoring around him. You just need one guard and him, and you're going to have a pretty successful offense, in my opinion.
That is great analysis on Nurkic. Moving on. Now we have 65 to 61. Tim Hardaway Jr. is a name that really stands out. Jeremy Grant got paid by Detroit, put up some numbers last year. Whether they were empty or not, I'd like to hear your analysis on that. Christian Wood, another name that really ascended last season. Of this group of players, let's talk about Tim Hardaway Jr. You being a Mavericks fan, you have him at 65. What are some of the key reasons that he's up this high?
Tim Hardaway Jr. has really shown himself to be a successful scorer of the basketball when creating for himself and when functioning off the ball. When the Mavericks first acquired him from New York a few years back, I had real concerns about his ability to consistently play off the ball and take good shots. And he's really, really progressed in my eyes as a three-point shooter in the catch-and-shoot scenarios. And that's really key when you're playing next to a guy like Luka Doncic. And let's be frank about it. This past playoffs, Tim Hardaway Jr. was the second best player on the Dallas Mavericks. Now, I think that there's a lot of factors that played into that. I still don't necessarily think he's a better player than Kristaps Porzingis for real. But having him 65th here means you're one of those elite third options on a team. And I think that's exactly what Tim Hardaway Jr. is. Last year, he looked like his number 2 option. I'm not going to buy all the way into that stock, but he's efficient, can come off the bench and give you baskets, can play in the starting lineup, very flexible player, and has improved greatly on defense over the few years he's been in Dallas as well. Now, I still don't think he's a build-around type player overall, but one of the better and role-playing scorers in the NBA, in my opinion.
Now we are getting a little closer to the middle of the list. And at this spot here, we have Jonathan Isaac, Bojan Bogdanovic, Malcolm Brogdon, Gordon Hayward. A lot of people thought Gordon Hayward got overpaid. Tell us why Gordon Hayward means so much to the Hornets right now.
Well, you're looking at the Hornets organization, which just hasn't had stability over the last decade or so. You know, you've seen a lot of contracts to guys who haven't been proven players, guys like Bismack Biyombo over the years, Nicholas Batum, who they gave a big contract to coming from Portland with the assumption he could be something more than he had been currently at that point. Gordon Hayward's the opposite here. He was a proven player who, you know, maybe coming into the back end of his career is still going to be able to provide baskets for you, and he was a perfect fit with their long-term plan with LaMelo Ball. Finding a scoring wing option, it's just hard to do in the NBA. Gordon Hayward, to be able to acquire him as easily as they did, just using cap space basically, you know, stretch and wave of Nicholas Batum, greatly improved their roster. We saw it last year. The Hornets nearly made the playoffs. Without a late season collapse, they definitely would have gotten in. And that's what you can really attribute to having a rookie guard at the back end of a season. It's just tough to win a ton of games in the NBA with a rookie point guard. And they were still very successful last year, and I think there's a lot to build off of there. In Charlotte, one player I do really want to focus on is Jonathan Isaac here, because he's coming off a torn ACL, and I think he's one of the most slept-on players in the NBA. Outside of Kawhi Leonard, Jonathan Isaac is the best perimeter defensive player in the NBA, and I don't even think it's particularly close. On the defensive end of the floor, he is so special. He can match up with a guy like Kristaps Porzingis, 7'3". He can match up with 7-footers consistently who are perimeter-centric players, guys who are going to, you know, shoot it over the top of you. He offers that elite length, elite size at 6'10", phenomenal foot speed as well. He can cover point guards. He is the do-it-all type of player on the defensive end of the floor. It's a bummer he doesn't have more of an offensive game, honestly, because if he did, he could easily ascend into my top 35, top 40, honestly, if he was just a little bit more functional on that end of the floor.
Great point on Jonathan Isaac. Once again, not a lot of people recognize his game, especially since it's mainly on the defensive end is where he is truly special. That's why a lot of people don't hear about him in the mainstream media. Looking at 55 to 51, we have a couple of role players in here, Jordan Clarkson, Duncan Robinson being two of them, but also we have a playoff star, DeAndre Ayton, and also your top rookie, Cade Cunningham. Which of these would you like to allude to?
I think Duncan Robinson's the key one here, because I think a lot of fans around the NBA are going to say, how do you have Duncan Robinson 54th overall as your 54th best player in the NBA? All he does is shoot. And to be honest, yes, you're right. Pretty much all he does is shoot, but he's the best shooter in the NBA, besides Steph Curry, obviously. He's the best catch and shoot guy. He runs off of screens. And without him, the Miami Heat offense last year would have been a complete disaster. When Duncan Robinson was off his game, that team just didn't put up fights. That's a big reason why they got bounced in round one. Duncan Robinson had an off series, and they just couldn't score the basketball anymore at that point. I think it'll be a little bit better with the addition of Kyle Lowry this year. But when you have a guy who can literally draw two pairs of eyes at all times going off of screens, it just makes life so much easier for your team. He's so deadly on the move as a shooter. He's so deadly as a guy who can actually, you know, pull up himself now in the pick and roll game. That's really where his development has really come since leaving the University of Michigan and coming to the NBA. He's gotten so much better as a ball handler, specifically going to his right, attacking screens. I think that's really his biggest strength now at this point, is his ability to become a pseudo playmaker when there's really heavy contests over the top on him. He's not just a catch and shoot guy. He's growing a little bit into becoming a more fluid playmaker, and it just makes his shooting all the more deadly.
Absolutely. There's great points on Duncan Robinson. For those who don't know, he is that second best shooter in the league. You could have some arguments in terms of his difficulty of shots. There are other players like Damian Lillard that hit huge shots, but Duncan Robinson, elite catch and shoot guy, 100%. And we're going to move on once again, 50 to 46. A couple of big name players, one of them being Lonzo Ball. He really burst onto the scene last year, really made some strides in his game. Impressive. But Pascal Siakam is the highlight player for you. Talk about his game.
His game is really, really evolving, honestly, because he was such a hype player right after the Toronto Raptors won the championship, even to the point where Masai Ujiri turned down a supposed trade of Siakam and picks for Paul George, Russell Westbrook, and basically the ability to keep Kawhi Leonard in free agency. Masai Ujiri turned that down, and now Pascal Siakam is kind of in a state of limbo because I think the Raptors are possibly looking to move on from him. He's become known as Cyclone Siakam for his constant use of the spin move, his inability to finish out games, because in the half court at the end of games, his bag just isn't deep enough to where it needs to be up a little bit higher on this list as a go-to player. I think he's a really good number 2 option for a team. We saw that when Toronto won a championship, he really was that pseudo number 2 along with Fred VanVleet. The two of them kind of coexisted in that role next to Kawhi Leonard as their next scoring options. And for Pascal Siakam, I think honestly, best case scenario is he does get traded. Scotty Barnes is there to replace him long term. I think Masai Ujiri's probably done with Pascal Siakam. Remember last year too, there was a little bit of a blow up. Pascal Siakam got suspended for a game. The Raptors just, I think, are better off moving on from him, trying to bring in some assets back for him. And I think for Siakam's own career, I think he's better off going somewhere else and playing a little bit more of that Robin role next to a star level player.
Yeah, he will likely never be a Batman in his career, but he would make a phenomenal Robin player. Moving on to 45 to 41, we have a guy that just got a huge extension today in Michael Porter Jr. Also a key player on the Warriors, Draymond Green, and a first-year guy, Anthony Edwards, as well. Let's focus in on Michael Porter Jr. What does he bring to the table? Elite offensive player, more than people even might realize.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Austin, because you and I were talking off camera about this. And Michael Porter Jr., his efficiency is going to surprise you guys. So get ready, buckle your seatbelts here. For the level of difficulty of shots he takes, you would expect him to maybe be around 46, 47% from the field, someone who's going to maybe shoot 37, 38% from 3, because he's still super talented. He's a very talented player. Everybody knows that. But he shot 54% from the field this past year with that difficulty of shot. He shot 44.5% from 3 on over 6 attempts a game. Remember, he's a 6'10" player who can rebound the basketball, probably one of the best rebounding forwards in the NBA, honestly. And also very, very capable on all 3 levels as a scorer. There's never a shot he hasn't liked that he's seen on the floor. He is comfortable pulling up with 0 separation. And even when he does have separation because of Nikola Jokic's passing ability, he's just automatic at that point. We've seen it in the playoffs for a few years. I think this is a big year for him. Without Jamal Murray there, look to him to maybe try and up his point per game average up to 23, 24, and really prove that he is that max level player, which I think he's capable of doing.
Absolutely. Moving on, once again, we have 40 to 36. We have a hype player, LaMelo Ball, obviously showed a lot with the Hornets last season. Jamal Murray, another player that is a star in this league. And also we have a Julius Randle. Some people might think this is actually low for him considering the year he had last year, but kind of debunk some of those misconceptions about him.
Yeah, Julius Randle, really surprised me last year. And I've been on the Julius Randle hype train for a while, but I thought more so as like a secondary scoring option, someone who can be that face-up for you, catch in the mid-post area, put the ball in the deck once or twice, and get to the rim and finish with some nice playmaking capabilities. And he kind of proved me wrong. He played more as that pseudo point forward for them last year, which is, ultimately why the Knicks failed in the playoffs, is they just didn't have any other options around him. And then there was just too much pressure on Julius Randle. That's what keeps him out of the top 20, out of the top 25 debate for me, is when it really came down to the nitty gritty of the playoffs and he was supposed to be that guy. he just didn't really look the part, but I don't want to fully discredit him for such a phenomenal season he had last year. I think 36 is a very fair spot for him, especially since it is a one-year situation that we're looking at. The 1 year is really his pop year. So if we just give it a little bit more time, maybe he can work his way up the list a little bit more, especially with a more talented Knicks roster featuring Kemba Walker, Evan Fournier, and hopefully a little bit more continuity in Tibbs' second year as the head coach. Maybe we see Julius Randle climb a few more spots, but I think 36 is a very fair spot. And I do want to touch on LaMelo Ball as well very quickly. Very good last year. Of course, they did shrink at the end of the season. I talked about, that's kind of the difficulty of starting a rookie guard and having him be your go-to player. But that's what makes it so impressive. Point guard is the hardest position to play in the NBA because you are the decision maker. You're the guy handling all the pressure, making the decisions, really trying to propel your team to winning and losing games. That the point guard position impacts that more than any other position besides maybe center. And LaMelo Ball found a lot of success in year one, which I don't think a lot of people were fully expecting. It made sense for him as a prospect to be a phenomenal long-term prospect, but I think year one he was far ahead where a lot of people were expecting him, myself included, and he really impressed me all year last year.
Yeah, especially shooting the basketball. A lot of people were concerned about it, us included, about how would he shoot at the next level, but he definitely proved everyone wrong in that regard. At 35 to 31, a couple of the bigger names are starting to go here. Ben Simmons has obviously been the highlight player. He's been the entire news this entire offseason with him wanting out of Philadelphia. That makes things very difficult for the 76ers because they're going to have to break up Simmons and Embiid one way or another. It's a matter of when, not if. So first off, let's touch on his game. I know a lot of people are critical of him. They probably think you're completely wrong on him being the 31st best player in the league, but why does he deserve this spot?
Right. Some people are going to look at the most recent game and absolutely lose their mind. I mean, if we did that with Julius Randle for the last series, Knicks fans, I don't believe his field goal percentage was that pretty either. And I still have him 36. And Ben Simmons has a longer track record of being a successful player. He was an All-NBA first-team defender this past year. He's arguably one of the most versatile defensive players in the NBA. Can guard 1 through 4 very consistently. Very good foot speed. He's a nightmare in transition on the offensive end of the floor. And he's, a solid playmaker. I think his playmaking is a little overrated, honestly, at this point. That's what he came in from LSU as, a playmaking type of player. But let's be honest, in the half court, how many times do we really see him, really penetrating, getting to the rim and making a phenomenal dime pass? A lot of it's, out of the pick and roll, a little fake handoff, he gets to the rack and scores, or, he cuts and then finds a nice guy. He's not someone who's going to drive downhill and really, penetrate a defense, be a scoring threat, and then find somebody, which I think is what separates a guy like Luka Doncic, LeBron James, as just being better playmakers than Ben Simmons. But at the end of the day, his two-way ability and his nightmare ability in transition as a freak athlete, I have to keep him in my top 35 for sure.
And also, so people are not in our comment section, Brandon Ingram, that was a mistake. He does play for the Pelicans, just so people are aware of that. We are currently aware of that as well. We are going to once again move on and looking at this list, a couple of interesting names. One, the biggest name on here that's probably a surprise to a lot of people, Kristaps Porzingis is number 26. People are really, really down on him after last season, despite him having a very, very good statistical season. There was a little bit of fallout with Luka Doncic, Rick Carlisle, but now things seem to be kind of mended up with Jason Kidd running the ship there. So why is he 26?
Looking at Kristaps Porzingis, for some reason I feel like people think that he's just absolutely fallen off. I mean, he only scored 2 less points per game last year than his career best year in New York. And he actually posted a career high efficiency from the field last year at 47.5%. Shot the three ball very well, 37% from 3. And that came without really knowing when his touches were going to come in that offense. I've been talking to you a long time about this, that Rick Carlisle just didn't know how to coach Kristaps Porzingis, didn't know how to put him in the best spots. And also last year, Kristaps Porzingis, remember, in the shortened offseason from the bubble, came off a torn meniscus and played, I believe, 3 or 4 months earlier than Jaren Jackson did with the same injury, with injury history, being a lot bigger of a player, and also sustained that injury months after Jaren Jackson did. He came back extremely early from injury. The beginning of the season play for him was really poor, affected some of his season averages, and also the narrative around him at the start of the season kind of stuck with him all year long. And then coming to the playoffs, that was just a nightmare matchup. He's playing the 4 because that's Rick Carlisle's system, loves having Dwight Powell as a diver when he was the Dallas Mavericks head coach. And when you have Kawhi Leonard guarding you, and then you end up having Paul George switch onto you, it's just not going to be an easy matchup, especially when in Rick Carlisle's offense, it was, hey, Kristaps, you're going to space the floor for us. You're going to stand in the corner, and then when you do come up to screen, you're going to just fade. And the Clippers with their switch-heavy defense, that doesn't do anything for a pick-and-pop center like Kristaps Porzingis. I'd like to see him dive a little bit more, but I'm still there on the talent for him. He still averaged 2 blocks a game last year with reduced mobility from that knee injury. This is his first real offseason that he's been healthy for, I believe, 4 years now. If he can take advantage of it this offseason, he's going to come in as a different player, hopefully someone who gets to the rim a little bit more, especially cutting off the ball. I think that's really his one area of improvement coming into the season. And he could be a high-impact player. Remember, when Luka Doncic didn't play the last 2 seasons, he averages 28 and 12. So he's an elite scoring option. I just think that he has to figure out how to play off of Luka Doncic, and that's really going to come down to Jason Kidd this season.
Now at 25 to 21, a couple of guards are going off the list here, all of them actually being guards in this grouping. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander definitely has taken another big jump in his career. Ja Morant, you have Devin Booker. A lot of people think Devin Booker is that borderline top 10 talent. Why is he at 22 rather than that top 10 range?
This is really where you get to the point of splitting hairs on guys. Devin Booker is an extremely talented player, one of the best mid-range scorers in the NBA, very, very capable on the offensive end of the floor, and showed a key amount of defensive improvement last year. It's hard to not have Devin Booker as a top 20 player in the NBA. However, Bradley Beal, I just think, is a more complete offensive talent at this point, and I have Bradley Beal 21. When you get to the top 20, I think this is one of the strongest points in time that the league's ever seen. The top 20 is just kind of a different beast. I was going to mention here even the top 25. I just think there's a significant uptick here from 25 even to 30. I think that there's just a real difference in these types of guys. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander scored over 80% of his points last year, unassisted. He's that type of talent, and I have him 25th in the NBA. It's a tough time. Especially for some of these guards, you get grouped together a little bit, and it's just coming down to picking hairs. That's the only real reason why Devin Booker's 22, honestly.
And also, once again, you kind of alluded to this already, but this is not a slight to these players being at this spot. It's very, very competitive, very, very tough. And you'll see why once we get into that top 20, why it's kind of hard to put some of these guards up a little higher. Obviously, they're all very, very worthy of it. And it really only takes a part of a season to ascend yourself into this tier of players. One being Jaylen Brown. People don't view him as a top 20 player, but he offers so much versatility. He's a very good scorer, very good defender. What do you like about Jaylen Brown?
Jaylen Brown has gotten better and better and better and better every single season he's been in the NBA, and I'm projecting that jump again for him. He continues to improve. His footwork has improved mightily since he came into the NBA. He started out as a guy who, hey, he's going to be a hustle guy for you. He's going to make some plays. He's a freak athlete, and now fundamentally, technically sound player. He just continues to get better. I just love watching this guy play. He's one of the better two-way wings in the NBA, honestly, at this point. And if he didn't have Jason Tatum on his team, I think there'd be a lot more national recognition of how good of a player this young guy is. He gets outshined by another player on his team. Those two guys are, really the key build-around players there in Boston. I know it doesn't seem right that Jaylen Brown is ahead of Devin Booker to some of these people right now. But at the same time, you have to think a little bit longer with this. Devin Booker just made the playoffs for the first time in his career. Chris Paul really elevated his play, and that team really stepped up with Jay Crowder in there too, DeAndre Ayton. Jaylen Brown's been doing this. This is his, I believe he's a 2-time All-Star, and someone who has been a key part of that Celtics team. Even a few years back when Kyrie was out, they made a run to the Eastern Conference Finals, almost knocked off the Cavaliers that one year. Jaylen Brown was a key part of that team as well. He's been doing it for quite some time, and I think, again, with splitting hairs, Jaylen Brown, Devin Booker, both two guys that you could win a championship around at some point down the road.
Absolutely. Another guy, Rudy Gobert, obviously is a monster on defense, and he is such a high-impact player on that end of the floor. And you got to kind of talk a little bit about how does that defensive impact launch him at all the way to 16? Because obviously he doesn't have the offensive prowess, but defensively he's just insane.
Yeah, this is the one that's going to get a lot of flack, honestly, having Rudy Gobert 16th based on how the Jazz season ended, especially me having Donovan Mitchell below him here. And I understand it because there's going to be a lot of people who don't really understand how NBA defense works. That Jazz defense, that Jazz success in Quinn Snyder's system is predicated off the existence of Rudy Gobert. Without Rudy Gobert, the Jazz would struggle to be a playoff team. I'm going to be honest with that. I think Rudy Gobert is that big of a difference because right now on that team, there is nobody else who can guard anything on that roster. Donovan Mitchell was supposed to come out of Louisville as a big-time defensive product and just hasn't been that in the NBA, partially because he hasn't really applied himself on that end of the floor. Mike Conley's not what he used to be in Memphis. This isn't grit and grind Utah Jazz, okay? Mike Conley's not stopping guys off the dribble, especially bigger wing-type players. Bojan Bogdanovic, a very talented offensive player, doesn't stop guys off the dribble consistently either. Joe Ingles doesn't do it. Jordan Clarkson doesn't do it. Without Rudy Gobert, this team would give up 120-something points a night. He is the Defensive Player of the Year for 3 times now for a reason. He is an absolute beast. And the LA Clippers were the worst matchup again for this team because they were able to go small, really drag him out of the three-point line. And let's be honest, Trey Mann hitting a whole bunch of corner threes with Rudy Gobert being his matchup, I don't know how you can look at that and say this is Rudy Gobert's fault fully, because no one on the Jazz could stop Paul George or Reggie Jackson from getting to the rim every possession. The reason Rudy Gobert had to crash down to the lane and then run out 22 feet to the corner to contest a shooter is because there's no other defenders on this roster. Without Rudy Gobert, the Jazz defensively would be one of the worst teams of all time. And I think that they're very lucky to have his services, honestly, as a rim protector for that franchise.
And now we get into the top 15. This is really splitting hairs. There are a lot of very talented big men in this group. Anthony Davis just falling outside the top 10. You have Karl Anthony Towns, Joel Embiid, very, very talented and skilled big men. Talk about a little bit of the differences between these guys.
Karl Anthony Towns, I think, is a guy who's going to even take a further step than where I have him, honestly, at this point. Chris Finch knows how to run an offense through a key player. Karl Anthony Towns made such a good offensive jump last year when Chris Finch took over for Ryan Saunders. I'd been so low on Ryan Saunders for so long, and Chris Finch finally put the ball in the hands of their best player. And we saw a lot of winning start to come from that. We saw a much improved offense come from that. And I think Karl Anthony Towns is going to continue to improve as a player. Jimmy Butler, two-way machine. We know what he does. Jason Tatum really has grown as a defensive player. I still think he has a lot of room to grow as a playmaker, but he's one of the best scoring options now at this point in the NBA. He's got the physicality to deal with tough defenders. He's got the size to deal with quicker defenders. You can play him out of the post. You can play him in a wide variety of areas, on the ball, off the ball. He's accustomed to it all. He hits big shots. Love what he brings. Joel Embiid is a two-way freak, probably the best post-scoring player we have in the NBA at this point. And then you also look at one of the premier rim protectors in the NBA. And then 11, Anthony Davis. Again, I know this is going to get a lot of flack that he's outside the top 10. When you get to the top 10, these are players that I think if you have them on their roster, you can't miss the playoffs if he's your top guy. Anthony Davis has never proven to be that player for me that can win you a playoff series by himself. When he's played in New Orleans, it just never happened. Without a healthy LeBron James, the Lakers have never looked good, even when Anthony Davis is on the floor, and he struggled to stay on the floor. Those are just some of the things that hold him out of the top 10 for me. I know it's going to get some flack, but I feel very strongly about that.
And now drum roll, because we are in the top 10. We have one player here that draws a lot of criticism in Paul George, and we also have LeBron James that is at 6. This might rub people the wrong way. There's a lot to unpack, so let's get right into it. Why is Paul George still a top 10 player?
I've been putting my neck out for PG-13 for quite some time. You can go back on the channel, look at the videos when Kawhi Leonard tore his ACL. We didn't know that was a torn ACL at that moment, but we did know he was out of the Jazz series. I said the Clippers are still good enough to beat Utah. They went and showed that because of how good Paul George was as an individual player. You put Paul George on a team, you're not missing the playoffs with Paul George as your best player. It's just not happening. Damian Lillard, we know what he is as a three-point shooter from deep. Also, I think he's an underrated playmaker. And then LeBron, that's the big one here. I have him at 6. This is going to seem like a slight to LeBron James. I mean, the guy's just getting up there in age. He's going to be 37 years old in December. To be the 6th best player when you're 37 years old is remarkable. LeBron James is the best player of all time, in my opinion. So this is not a slight to him. I'm actually a really big time LeBron fan. I love the way that he plays the game of basketball, but just at the age of 37 years old this season, he's just not going to be the same guy he was 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. It's unfortunate. I don't want to see his career end anytime soon. I love watching him play, and I don't think being the 6th best player in the NBA at the age of 37 is a bad thing at all.
And now we're jumping into that top 5. Now, once again, there's going to be some criticism. There's a lot of people that don't believe that Luka Doncic is the best player in the NBA. Both of us on our collective big board would have him as our number 1 player. Let's give some reasons on that. But before we jump into it, you have James Harden at 3. Once again, people would not agree with that.
Yeah, let's start with James Harden, because he's the player. I'm sure 99% of people consider Kevin Durant to be the best player in the Brooklyn Nets. I'm in the 1% where I think James Harden's just a better player than Kevin Durant. I think KD's been very overrated. He got the luxury of playing with Steph Curry, who draws every single player on the floor's eyes at all times when he's running around. And until Kevin Durant played with Steph Curry, there was no legitimate argument for him being a top 3 player in the world. That just wasn't being talked about really at that point. You know, especially early 2010s, we still had Dirk Nowitzki, Kobe Bryant, LeBron, Carmelo, Dwight Howard at that point. There was a lot of guys that were still above Kevin Durant, and everyone would have, admitted to that until Kevin Durant got to the Warriors and got to play in a system where he never, ever saw double teams. You can't double team Kevin Durant when he was a Warrior. And for James Harden being better than Kevin Durant, how many times did he have to lead the Rockets to the Western Conference Finals where they flamed out? The first year without James Harden, that team couldn't buy a win. They were absolutely terrible. Even though they had some nice players, John Wall, Christian Wood, 2 guys I like, they still couldn't win without James Harden. He was that system. Mike D'Antoni said, okay, James Harden, you go win us games, and that's what he's done. And I also believe that James Harden's one of the only guys in the NBA that you could say, oh yeah, this year he's going to score 36 points a game, and then next year he's going to become a point guard for a team that wants to win a championship and lead the league in assists. No other players really do that consistently while putting up winning numbers and consistently putting up good statistic efficiency as well. James Harden's such a beast in that area. And then for Luka Doncic, I know that that's going to draw some flack as well. But when you watch him, he's a guy who puts up 28, 9, and 9. Good efficiencies from the field. He's just recently posted his career best this past season for the Dallas Mavericks. He's a player that wills that team. There's going to be a lot of people that think that Kristaps Porzingis is terrible, but still consider the Dallas Mavericks a contender. And the only reason that that could be the case is if Luka Doncic is the best player in the world, especially in the Western Conference. Every single offseason, he's gotten better. Even in the shortened offseason, he needed to improve his mid-range shot and came back as one of the best mid-range shooters this past year. He went from barely ever shooting mid-range shots to becoming the best one of the best mid-range shooters in the NBA, and I also think that he's going to continue to take steps forward as a fluid playmaker. Really, the only knock on him at this point is what can he do off the ball, because Rick Carlisle never asked him to do that. It was a lot of standing when Luka didn't have the ball, and if he can really develop a mid-post type of game, which I think he's capable of, he already hits those types of shots. He just needs to start, functioning in that area more, catching down there. That solves all the problems there for Dallas offensively, and I see him as the best player going into this next season, and I think he's going to win league MVP this year, and I think the Dallas Mavericks are a sleeper to make the NBA Finals.
You heard it here first. Sheldon has confirmed that he believes Luka will win MVP, and he also thinks that they will likely go to the NBA Finals. Thank you so much for watching this video. Subscribe if you are new. Also, leave a like if you did enjoy this video. We are posting lots of NBA content as we are gearing up towards the start of the season. We will likely have awards predictions coming to you soon. So thanks again for tuning in, and we will catch you guys in our next video.